say because, and slang is a great example because there's slang that here in the United States that means something very different in Great Britain. And it means something very different in Italy. And it means something very different in Germany. And so
It's funny you should say that, Andy.
So I think that...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You know, I used to teach a unit on ethics and morality in my class.
Yep.
And my friend, who happened to be the assistant principal, said, "Whose ethics and whose morality are you teaching?" And I said, "Jimmy." And I said, "Jimmy." I said, "Good Catholic boy. Ethics and morality should be the same no matter what you are, whether you're white." And he was referring, obviously, to black culture, African American culture. And what I was trying to say is, ethics and morality, spans the gamut. Whether you're white or black or yellow, whether you're Christian, Muslim, or Jew, ethics are ethics. It's the right thing to do in certain situations. That's all we're going to discuss. Because he was afraid I was going to offend somebody. Okay?
Yeah.
And this is what faces educators today. You have to be so careful. This whole business of these children as opposed to our children, or you people as opposed to all of us, where everybody looks to find something to nitpick and say, well, you're not being open-minded, And he, as educated as Q seemed to be, and knowledgeable, there were certain things that he did say, that offended me as a Jew. But I mean, look, Felix and I always say that you don't have to agree with us. In fact, when we disagree, it lends to the discussion. And I won't say an argument, but a difference of opinion. And that's fine. Because if people...
And that is exactly the whole point. That is exactly what I'm trying to get to, is that, you know what? Everybody has personal beliefs, but if people could talk about it, and I think you've alluded to it too, if people could just talk about it, the discussion opens up a communication that ultimately it doesn't eliminate the personal beliefs and ethics, but what it does is it gives a basis for understanding. And I think that that's more important than whether or not someone agrees or disagrees, or they agree to disagree. If you at least understand,
you're 100%.
It gives you...
That's right. You're 100% right.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. You have to be able...
And that's what drives me crazy because, many Americans, and I will make sure I clarify that, have a perception of what's going on in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and the Middle East, and their perception is based on what they see on television. And it's not, their perception is not real. And I see that, especially since I've moved to Colorado, having lived through 9/11 and having been there and seen it with my own eyes. You come to a place here in Colorado, and when you talk to people about 9/11, it's almost as though it was something that happened on TV, and it's not, it wasn't real. It was something they watched on television. And so the perception is so different. And if you could sit down and understand, then your perception gets changed a little bit, and that's what builds communication and all the other things that come along with it, including peace. And I think that our perception of our leaders is, some people think they're wonderful, and some people think they're horrible. And I think that is where we need to do a better job of vetting and really, really understanding who it is that we're putting in that position of power.
Well, unfortunately, we really don't know. I mean, we may say we know, but, the people that the nominees that the people of Iraq will have to vote on, or the people of Egypt, we only know so much about them. I will say that on especially the Sunday morning talk shows and everything, they do have representatives who will explain what their viewpoint is and why they feel this person or candidate is the best one to lead the country. But once you get into power, once you get elected, actually, using the word power is the wrong word. You're being pulled in so many different directions. Your perspective changes so greatly. It's like, okay, now you're the man, or you're the woman. What do you do now? What promises do you decide to keep?
Well, this happens right here in the United States. Forget about any other country.
I'm talking about here.
No, you said, well, all right, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I guess my other concern with that is that, these people that are, these whoever it is that are going to be elected in those positions in those countries that right now are in the middle of war-torn, are we, the United States, or is Great Britain, or is Russia, or one of the developing countries going to get involved and financially fund them so that they can be elected because that's who we want in that position, and then turn around and find out, oh, we made another mistake?
Well, look what happened in Cuba. Everybody agreed that Batista had to leave, so we backed Che Guevara and Castro, and then he got in and he thumbed his nose at us and said, something, America, F you, and he embraced,
how many times do we make that mistake before we step back and say, okay, wait a minute? The people that live there probably know a little bit more than we do.
They know a lot more, and you know it too. I know that's the point you're making.
Exactly.
Things rarely turn out the way we would like them to turn out. But you have to learn, whether you agree with people or not, you have to learn to sit down and talk to them. You have to learn to sit down and talk to people like Putin. Okay? You have to learn to sit down and talk to people like Assad. Just like, certain senators who shall go nameless used to praise Hussein and Gaddafi. One year you're praising them, and the next year you're saying they have to go. One year we're saying Assad has to go, and now we're saying that Assad's going to be sort of an ally in all of this because he's in charge of the Syrian army, and we're going to rely heavily on the Syrian army to fight ISIS. But the bottom line is, obviously, whenever you deal with the Middle East and everything, we're straying from the topic of why people hate Jews, and I think because throughout history, as I said before, Jews have always been an outsider. They've never been really accepted in communities where they lived. And sometimes it was their actions, the way they dressed, the clothes they wore, the food that they ate, the way they prayed. They didn't pray in Latin; they prayed in Hebrew.
I don't think we're straying from the topic because I think what I'm trying to point out is that we.
No, I said I was straying from the topic. I said I was straying from the topic.
Human beings tend to do that to everybody, and I'll use. Here's another example. You're a middle class or an upper class white person. Okay, you live in a nice house, you have a nice car, blah blah blah. You work hard, and you turn your nose down or you turn your nose up at someone who lives in a trailer. Okay, and you do that because you call them quote unquote trailer, and I won't say the word. Okay, but that person is probably no different than you. They just didn't have whatever avenues it was that got you to where you got. And it's not necessarily because they didn't work. It's not necessarily because they didn't try. It's not necessarily because they didn't want those things. It's that for whatever reason in their life, that their path never went down that road. And so who are you, middle class / upper class white person, to turn your nose at that person who has less than you do, all because they live in a trailer, or they don't own a home, they have an apartment, or whatever the case may be. And I think that we, and I'm going to, again, use it loosely, we do that to everyone that's different than us. And it's mind-boggling to me why we do it. I had a conversation just the other day. I had a conversation the other day with a bunch of people who are fairly successful business owners. And we were talking about the minimum wage. And I was saying, do you think that it's fair that someone who's working at McDonald's, is making $8 an hour? I'm sorry, but in this society, in this day and age, no one can live on that. They just cannot live on it. And their answer to me was, well, then they need to do something to make their life better. And my answer to that was, okay, wait a minute. So I know a kid, went to college, okay, got a master's degree, went to Russia, got a secondary master's degree in Russia, speaks 5 languages, and he can't make more than $17 an hour. And it's not that he hasn't tried, because he's been trying, working hard, working 4, 5, 6 hours a night overtime, doing everything in his power to get ahead, and just can't get ahead. One of the reasons why he can't get ahead is because certain people in the department don't like him. One of the reasons why he can't get ahead is because, the senior guy doesn't want to retire and he's 80. So I think we do that to everybody, and we have no right.
Well, that's what Q was saying. I think that was one point that he was trying to bring out. Okay. And one thing that I was bringing out is that, like I said, if you take 10 couples, 5 white couples, varying, ethnicities, incomes, and you take 5 African American couples, you will find that they want the same thing. Okay? Everybody wants the same thing for their children, for themselves, for their families. We have, as Cosby said in the new book that was written about him by Mark Whitaker, which I said a long time ago to my students, everybody wants the same thing. You're going to find that we have more in common than makes us different. So why don't we concentrate on the things that make us the same rather than the things that make us different?
Exactly.
If you were to read if you were to read a resume by 2 different people, a white person and a black person, but you're reading a resume and nowhere on the resume does it state race, because you're not allowed to. Okay? And they're both equal, and you don't know which one to hire, and you interview both of them, and you find out one's a white guy and the other one is a black woman. And I say black woman not because I'm stressing it in a negative connotation, but you have a double minority here, a woman and a black woman. Okay, who do you hire? What questions do you ask? Do you ask the woman if she's married and if she's planning to have children anytime soon? You can't ask that. And even if you were to ask that of the guy, he's not the one that's going to bear the child. Okay? So he can continue working. Until you have the 2 candidates in front of you, and then how do you decide? Does your own prejudice come into play here? If we lived in a society where there wasn't any, it wouldn't make a difference which one you hired. But in one case, if you hire the white guy, you have 2 minorities that you're going to have to answer to. You're going to have to answer to the women, and you're going to have to answer to black organizations. Okay? And I'm not saying it's going to go that way, that you're going to hire the white guy. It's just that you don't know until we actually see the 2 candidates. And then you say to yourself, I wish I could hire both of them. That would be the simple thing.
And unfortunately, here in the United